All right, so at this current point, we are moving on to part 2 of the show. Today is Tuesday. Is today the 28th? Let's take a look at the date. Is today the 28th? It is the 27th. Okay. So at this current point, we are moving onward and upward to part 2 of the show today. And I've already talked about part 1. I want you guys to tune into part 1. It involved Golden Boy MMA 1, my thoughts on the event, and much, much more. As far as part 2 goes, we're getting into a point in the season where, and then in the sports season this year, where we're starting to figure out which coaches in the National Football League can, quote, hack it or not. If you don't get the pun in that, Nate couldn't hack it. Whether that's Nate Peterman or Nathaniel Hackett, neither one could hack it. So, outside of my corny, cheesy puns, I have a select group of coaches that if I were their bosses, I would have either fired them already or I will put out my blueprint to fire them at the end of the season. The first coach I want to start off with is a coach that I am shocked that he still has a job. I've watched as much uninspiring football by this team this season more than any other team. And it's a team that I didn't think would be great. I didn't think this team would be great. I thought this team would be so-so, mediocre, not that great, but would show signs of life, would show some decent signs of looking pretty good. And that's Sean McDermott. No, I'm just kidding. Sean McDermott's not going anywhere. That's my guy. He's going to be around a long time. But the coach I'm referring to is Todd Bowles, that of the New York Jets. And Todd Bowles has lost his locker room. I don't care if Jamal Adams is screaming from the top of his lungs that he supports Todd Bowles and he'll play for him and all that corny stuff that you see in the Disney movies. I don't care about any of that. I only care about one thing, and that is what I see on the field. And what I see on the field is the Jets suck. They're terrible. They're way worse than what they should be. Not that they should be that great, but they're pretty bad. The way they've been losing has been pretty bad. Case in point, a couple weeks ago, Matt Barkley comes in for the Buffalo Bills and tears them to shreds. That shouldn't happen. That shouldn't have happened. I don't want to say it was a fluke, but a well-coached team would have been prepared and prevented that from happening. They're not well-coached, which means that the coach has to go. There's just no doubt about it. As far as the direction they go in at head coach, I'd like for them to bring in somebody younger. There's a lot of young offensive coordinators out there that are looking for head coaching jobs. Guys like John DeFilippo would be decent, especially with Sam Darnold, I think. That would be great. But maybe they go the defensive route. The Jets haven't hired an offensive background head coach in, I think, 40 years. So I think they need to get started and get with the times. Really successful offensive coordinators have turned head coaches in recent years. Sean McVay in particular. So I know there's not many Sean McVays out there, and I know those Sean McVays don't grow on trees, but they did draft Sam Darnold, and they need to make their offense as best as it can possibly be, because that is what has a lot of holes on their team, and that's what I think they need to do. The next guy is a little bit interesting. The next guy has entered his first season as an NFL head coach, and yes, I do think he should be fired, and that is the Arizona Cardinals' Steve Wilks. Wasn't really too crazy about this hire in the first place, and I thought that he wouldn't really provide immediate results, even in losing or in winning. And you can find results in losing. You can find some things that you did right, some things you did wrong. But I haven't seen Arizona play well at all, at any point during this season. And I don't think they're not tanking. They're not, calling it in. They're not doing anything like that. They're trying to win games. And their offensive line and everything like that. We knew that their line Excuse me. We knew that their line would be bad. We knew that it would take a little bit of time, but I don't think Steve Wilkes is the guy. And I hate to fire a dude after 1 year, but you need someone that has more of a pedigree in Arizona. And I think that's why a guy like Bruce Arians worked so well the first time around. The last head coach that they hired outside of Steve Wilkes, Bruce Arians, worked so well because he had a really good pedigree. Came from a long coaching tree of coaches that had a lot of success in this league. Guys like Dungy, guys like Cowher. And that's exciting. So maybe they go down the line of someone like that. Maybe they do go after a Josh McDaniels type coach. I've never been really too high on Josh McDaniels, but that might be the hire that they go out and they go and make that move. Josh Rosen has skill, but it's not going to be seen if he's on this type of team with this type of head coach. Another head coach I'd like to see can would be Dirk Cutter from the Tampa Bay Bucks. The Tampa Bay Bucks have probably one of the worst defenses I've seen in recent memory. And Jameis Winston has been a guy that has been thrown in, thrown out, put in, put out, back in. Fitzpatrick, it's been a mess in terms of Tampa Bay's offense, and their defense has been a mess, which leads me to one conclusion, that Dirk Cutter is unorganized, doesn't know what his team needs, and still has yet to figure out the pulse of his team. And yet he's been on this team as their head coach for multiple seasons, and they still can't get it figured out. Why? Why is that? Well, it's because they have a head coach that can't make up his mind. I want a coach with conviction. I want a coach that brings an aggressiveness, a true sense of let's get our heads out of our asses and let's go to war. And maybe it's tough to find those guys because they're old school. Some of them are retired coaches. Some of them haven't coached in quite a while. But there's one guy that I just don't hold out belief that he is done. And I'll get to that in a little bit. But we get to my next hire, or next team that needs to fire their head coach, and it's an obvious one. That would be the Cleveland Browns and the interim head coach Greg Williams, due to the fact that Greg Williams, I think, if given a case study by the University of wherever, they would come to the conclusion that Greg Williams is partially insane. This guy is off his rocker, off his marbles, and the real issue with that and saying that statement is I don't know if Greg Williams ever had any marbles to lose, because this guy has been a maniac since he got into the NFL as a defensive assistant, and ever since it's just been a long, winding road, one that led him to become a head coach of the Buffalo Bills, crashing and burning with that idea, parlaying that into another defensive coordinator job with one of the most mediocre head coaches in NFL history in Jeff Fisher. And that's the word I think of when I think of Greg Williams, mediocre. And Cleveland was promoted as this team that was under a revival on HBO Hard Knocks, which I laughed my ass off at that notion. I really did. Called my friends and said, look, do you see this? Do you see this? They think that Tyrod is going to even start. How many games did he start? 4? I thought he'd be out week 5. I think he might have got me by a week. Can't remember. But they do have a talented quarterback in Baker Mayfield who really showed maturity this year that I didn't think he had in him. Never questioned his skill set, just his maturity. Wondered if things were to go wrong for him in the NFL, would he be able to swallow his pride and his ego and bounce back and fight back, and he's been able to do that. Really what Cleveland needs, as I said about the Cardinals, is they need an identity. They need a coach that has a pedigree, that can come in and change the way people look at the Browns in terms of their image to the NFL, to the fans, to the entire football sports world. And that really starts at the top. That starts with ownership. And I think Cleveland has the worst group of owners that you could possibly have in any professional sports league. With what they've been able to pull these last few years and some of the reports that we've seen about them being interested in Condoleezza Rice. No offense to her, but she doesn't have I won't say it because it's people will deem it offensive, but she's a politician. She's not a football coach. She's a fan. And let's be real, that's not something that the Cleveland Browns fans really want. So let's give them what they want. Let's give the Cleveland Browns fans what they want for once, and let's give them Bill Cowher. Let's give them a guy that, from Pittsburgh, knows the division. I think he's contemplating coming back, and I think he's contemplated that for a long time. He lives in New York City. Maybe he'll take the Jets job. That's a possibility, a very distinct possibility, but if I'm Cleveland, I try to outbid the Jets to get him and pitch the idea that they have a better quarterback. Whether that's the case is debatable, whether people like Mayfield over Darnold, whether people think Mayfield is better than Darnold, that's a debate to have at a later date. But I just think the Browns need an identity, and they don't have that identity right now. They need a coach, that can come in and give them the respectability that they deserve. And really saying that they deserve respectability is a tough sell, but I say that due to their fans. They have fantastic fans. There's a few other gigs out there that could be under spotlight. Cincinnati with Marvin Lewis. I think it's time for him to go. I think it's been time for him to go, but they've wanted to keep him on for whatever reason, for continuity, but they might promote from within with Hugh Jackson. Who knows with Cincinnati? They have just been one of those weird teams these last few years. Try to think of some other divisions and some other teams, but really those are the main teams that jump out at me. And I really believe that in terms of the Bengals, they just need the complete opposite of Marvin Lewis. And that would mean an offensive coach, someone to heighten the skill set of who they currently have, and we'll see where they go towards that. Maybe they go into the college ranks. We'll see. I'm Ryan Thomas. Who's on my hot seat? There you have it. Take care, everybody.